Good morning, dearest friends. It is Tuesday, June 28th. Chaf Tes Sivan. Tomorrow is the last day of Sivan, but today's the last day. That's not also Rosh Chodesh. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, we are exploring Maseches Shabbos, chapter 17, page Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Beis 123b. So it's 123b. That's what we are studying. We are on the cusp of closing out a Mishnah, the first Mishnah of chapter called Hakelim, which has been talking about different tools, which maybe have multiple uses, or at least broadly have a dual function, and the ability to use those Kalim, which led us to different opinions. Rabbi Yehuda about a tool which has a prohibited use, can it be used? Along the way, we also talked about tiltul menatzad, carrying something, moving something either indirectly or in a atypical manner. We had the opportunity to talk about muksa machmas, chesron kiss, something that's very delicate and has a precise, specific place where it is meant to be. So we've done a lot of stuff. We closed out with a discussion about a machat, about a needle. The bulk of the discussion was not about the permissibility of using the needle on Shabbos per se, but about if it is considered muktzah, because it remains useful to take out a thorn. And we talked about a broken needle, a needle that has an eye hole. We talked about comparing and contrasting a being classified as a kli on Shabbos versus being classified as a kli for the purposes of ritual purity. But the last open tab that I said we'll address today before going on is the question of using a needle on Shabbos in order to remove a splinter, to remove a thorn. Is it mutter? Why is it mutter? We have a lot of questions that are yet outstanding.
But Rabbi, why tear the skin on a Shabbos? It's not an emergency. A splinter is not an emergency. A splinter is not an emergency.
You tell that to the guy that's howling in pain with a massive thorn in the bottom of his foot. It depends where it is, depending how big it is. It either is or isn't. We're not talking about a pikuach nefesh emergency, but I could imagine a person that's experiencing it feeling that it is somewhat of an emergency. So, what I want to talk about briefly, I want to just show you a few things. I'm going to work backwards. Oh, I can't minimize, but I can share my screen. Let me share the screen. It turns out the question or the answer is fairly elementary. Not to us, but if you're a big sage in the Gemara, it's probably an elementary matter. So the first thing I want to show you here is the Meiri on our Mishnah. The Meiri, again, is a commentator from Provence, popular, beautiful commentary. He borrows a lot of the language and style of the Rambam. So here on the Mishnah, he talks about a needle, and he says simply like this. In the discussion of our Mishnah, the Mishnah is saying that you can extract a thorn, a splinter on Shabbos, and therefore it has a permissible use, and therefore it is not muktzah. Yeshiraya, this is clearly a proof. Excuse me, shemoitzi mashenichnas bebasar ha'adam, the extraction of something that has gone into the skin or the flesh of a person. Min hakoitzim, from the thorns, umin habar konim. Dr. Stamler, Modern Hebrew, has a word for bar konim.
It's a thorn. It's a thorn bush.
Okay, splinter, a thorn is Shabbos. From here we can bring evidence that one may remove a foreign object that has lodged itself within a person's skin. And similarly, he points out the thing we learned earlier in the Gemara, you're allowed to squeeze a wound. This is not a psak. This is not halacha l'maisa, but just about. You're allowed to squeeze, put pressure on a wound so that some of the moisture, the pus, comes out. But not to expand the opening. And the others, okay, that's already the next one. So the Meiri explicitly tells us what the Gemara elsewhere says, that you're allowed to remove a splinter on Shabbos. Indeed, I want to bring your attention back to a Gemara we learned not a terribly long time ago. This is way back on page 107. This is actually at the end of chapter, I don't remember anymore, was it 11 or 10? So here the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel. Again, this is an important reference for our Gemara. That's why we're doing it. Otherwise, Kol Patorei Shabbat, Kol Patorei de Shabbat. Whenever we say in the laws of Shabbos that one is pater, what we mean to say is pater abel aser. You are exempt from the gravest biblical liabilities, but it is yet prohibited mid-rabbanan, rabbinic. Levarmi hanitlas, the pater and mutar, with 3 exceptions. Chada. The first instance is what we're talking about, what the Gemara is talking about over here. Was talking about a deer, whatever. I don't remember the exact details. But we mind the pater mutar. How do we know it's pater mutar? And he goes through the discussion and says that if you close the door and a deer is there, whatever. Second case, hamapis morso b'Shabbos. It's the case of extracting pus from a boil, a wound. What do we say? Let's read it. Actually, let's read it again. The second instance that the Gemara is talking about that you're actually allowed to do is mapis morsa, extracting pus or whatever from a wound. Even the so if you do it to make an opening so that the air should come in and help heal it, remember we're making a opening, so that's prohibited. But just to extract, mutter, pater. How do I know that this is actually lichatchila? You're allowed to do it. Tanan, we quote a brisa that's, or a mishnah rather, that says ma'achat shel yad. Our mishnah, a needle used by hand, litol bo'es hakoitz. You're allowed to extract a thorn. What do we see over here? We see over here, ma'achat shel yad. They tell us b'Shabbos litol bo'es hakoitz. V'hainu dumya delecha de misarle. This is an instance similar to pus, a foreign subject. A buildup of something that does not belong within our skin causes pain. And it tells long story short, I'm sorry for running this. Long story short, usually maybe it would be prohibited. But because there is tsar and it's a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa, when you extract the pus, you have no interest or value in the break of the skin. You don't want that. And so here too, when you're extracting the thorn, you're not hoping for a wound. You're hoping to mitigate, to minimize any kind of injury or bleeding. And for that purpose, our Mishnah is proof that this is mutar lechatchila. And so from here we understand la halacha that one would be permitted. Oh, I'm sorry, I should not have closed that window. Let's see if they can give it back to us. What I want to do now, just for another split second, is let's see if the Shulchan Aruch. No, I have to go back and find it. But anyways, this is evident from our Gemara. I just want to see if we can get if they'll give us with ease. Bear with me just a moment. I'm looking for.
I still have a hard time understanding this.
Go ahead,
because
explain why you're having a hard time understanding this.
pus doesn't appear immediately. Pus is a buildup.
No.
So if he got the thorn in on Thursday, why didn't he take it out on Thursday? Why did he have to wait till Friday and then
Alan, you know what we
Saturday?
call this? We call this a kashaf amaisa. It could happen that your pus will become aware to you, or first become a problem, or start hurting you on Shabbos. And although it's a buildup, it could be a buildup of hours, not days, right?
It's not going to kill him. He can wait till Sunday.
You shouldn't know.
Alan, maybe it was in Quebec and he's still waiting for the ambulance.
Maybe.
They don't understand it, Alan, eh?
No. That's a good one.
Thank you, Rebel. Anyways, long story short, that's what we're saying over here, that you're allowed to remove a splinter. And so we'll leave it at that. That's what what our Gemara seems to be telling us. Now let's start a new Mishnah. A very short Mishnah. Kana shel zaysim, a reed that's used for olives. Let's ignore just for a moment Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation. We'll end up embracing it, but im yesh kesher b'roishai, if there's a knot on the top, mikabel tuma, it is susceptible to become ritually impure. The imlav, but if it does not have this kesher on the top, we'll see what that kesher is. Ein mikabel tuma, it is not susceptible to become ritually impure. Bein kach or bein kach, regardless of if it has or does not have this kesher, nitol b'Shabbos, it is not muktzah on Shabbos. It can be used on Shabbos.
So we see here, by the way.
Hold on. Let's see. I think I know what you're gonna say, but let's just see Rashi first. Then you're gonna, yeah. After they've been crushed, correct? Soiber, he piles them up. They've been pulverized. He piles them up, and it becomes easier to extract, to remove, to have the oil. And he uses this to stir it up, to tinker with it, to see what's going on in this pile of crushed olives. It's not exactly a knot, but a cork of sorts. Mikabel tuma, so then it becomes susceptible to ritual impurity. It becomes considered a kli because the top of it has a certain width, which has or resembles a vessel. So the Gemara is going to really analyze briefly what our Mishnah is talking. Dr. Stalman, tell me, are you going to tell us that we compare or distinguish between Tuma and Shabbos in our Mishnah itself?
No, you're giving me too much credit.
Okay.
So my statement was going to be simple, that, I mean, they give us all these specific cases. So we can look at it one or two ways. Either we look at each case and we say we can also learn out of it for other cases, similar ones, or do we look at these to the exclusion of any other kli?
To my knowledge, this is case law, and it's meant to be inferred from for other similar situations.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what I find interesting with this cork-like knot, which I found it's very, very interesting, because if you use those ties that tie a plastic bag, that's a cork-like knot. That's not a real knot. Be a question on Shabbos to take the challah from the bag if there's one of those little.
No, I think it's not really a knot at all.
That's a cork-like, no? It's twisting around itself. Very interesting word.
Yeah, I don't really understand I can't visualize precisely what this tool looks like. What I understand is that it's a long stick that has in the end something wider or bigger that's
No, I'm talking about the knot itself to describe that tie. To me,
right.
that tie is a cork-like knot.
You know what? Let me look in the Steinsaltz Gemara, which I don't have open for some reason. Let's see if he provides us an illustration. Otherwise, we'll just have to use our imagination, but that would be a shame. I'm kidding. But does he give us a picture or not? Well, I'll tell you what he does give a picture. He gives us a picture of a Kornas Shel Besamim, our hammers that we're talking about. Nope. No, he does not give us a picture. He doesn't owe it to us, but it would be helpful. Well, anyways, so imagine it's a tall stick with a wider end, some kind of function. Today, I don't think it's very much in use for that purpose. Maybe a walking stick of sorts. Anyways, the Mishnah says simple. For the purposes of ritual impurity, it needs to have this extra bulb, this knot, this cork-like thing at the end. But for the purposes of Shabbos, it is considered a kli, and therefore it is not considered a muktzah. Now, obviously, at least to me, it's obvious that whatever malacha you're doing, whatever specialty, use, whatever you're doing with this, whatever function you're doing with this stick, it doesn't sound Shabbos-tic. And so it's similar to the previous Mishnah. Its primary use is not, at least that's what I understand. Its primary use is not mutter. And yet we're saying because you can plausibly have a permissible use, one may wield it, one may carry it. That's how I understand this Mishnah. I believe that's what the Mishnah is saying. Does that make sense? Let's see the Gemara. Amai, which really, the Gemara reminds us that we need to have a basic introduction to the laws of ritual impurity, which is as follows. Depending on the substance, depending on what the vessel is made out of, there are different criteria for it to be considered a kli or not. Without going into all the laws of ritual impurity, wood that is smooth, flat, without a receptacle, if it doesn't have an ability to accept, to receive something, it's not considered a kli. In the words of the Gemara, in the words of the Mishnah and laws of impurity, pshute kli eitz. Smooth, flat, non-receiving wood is not susceptible to ritual impurity. So the Gemara asks, "Amai pshute kli eitz, so pshute kli eitz, eina mekablim tuma." Flat, smooth, without an indent, without some kind of receptacle, is not mekabel tuma. That's the reason why it should not be ritual. It should not be able to be mekabel tuma. Let's read Rashi. Ki yesh by kesher b'roishai, even it has this knot, this bulb, whatever it is. Nihi nami de kesher mashvile mana. In truth, maybe it's this end piece that makes it very effective in its use. Miu pshute klietzu, so it remains yet a non-receiving. I don't know what the right word is. It remains pshute klietz. It has no ability to receive something into it.
It can't contain anything.
It's unable to contain anything. Yes. Even if it would be a hollow reed, it's not used to receive anything, and so it should remain not mekabel tuma. So again, this is a question that's really not relevant. It's not germane to the laws of Shabbos, but because our Mishnah, along the way to talk about Shabbos, talks about ritual impurity, the Gemara asks, what's going on over here? So the Gemara answers, my time, and why is it that wooden vessels must have a receptacle or they're not mekabel tuma. And you may remember this. We have touched upon this in the past. Dumya the sak ba'inan. In the Torah, when it talks about different kalim, it puts wooden kalim adjacent to sak, to sack. Sack is used to receive, to put something into it. And wood has to have the same criteria. And this wooden reed that's used for processing olives does not have it. So the Gemara answers, Tana, Mishmeid Rav Nechemia. An explanation from a Tana taught a teaching in the name of Rabbi Nechemia. Why is it Mekabel Tuma? B'shah shemahafech b'zeisim. Hoiv choy v'roya boy. When he's doing his olive stirring, he turns it around, looks at the end, and sees if and how much oil has actually come into the cavity on the knot. So although there's a very, very small amount, but it ultimately does contain some oil, it is therefore now not considered pshutei kliyates. It's considered a receptacle, even though for a very small amount. And therefore, the Tana Mishmeid Rabbi Nechemia explains it should be mekabel tuma. It should be able to be richly impure. What we're going to do is we're going to read Rashi, and then I want to read Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation. He looks at the hollow part at the end. Because it's plugged. You see, I don't understand, but maybe now with Rashi, I'm going to get a picture of what this tool looks like. What Rashi seems to be saying is that there's a cork or a plug that's extended into the reed. I did not understand that. I may revise my impression yet again, but let's read based on Rashi. That's what it seems like. At the head, there's a little hollow which holds or contains the oil because shuhu pakuk b'kesher, because it's sealed up with this knot-like plug. Min Hashem min azav min azeisim, and it has some oil that's flowing out of the olives. Uboidik boy imigia la'atzar, and he's checking to see what degree of concentration of oil or whatever. Vizuhi loy kabbalah b'chalal shaloi, and this makes it now a receiving kli. V'im but if it doesn't have shein kesher b'roshai, ein shemen nirasham, you cannot inspect the oil that's collected. So ironically here, the less space you have in the hollow of the reed, the more we'll consider it a receiving kli. If not, have a pshutik kli'etz ben kach or ben kach nito b'Shabbos laklihu la'afach b'zeisim. Regardless of if it has this cork or not, on Shabbos it can be carried because it is considered a kli for the purposes of olives, and therefore you could do something else that is within your world on Shabbos. Now let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz, then we'll take a peek in the Rambam, see how he codifies this halacha. The halacha's original period derives from the sack mentioned in the Torah as an example of an item that can become tummy. If it lacks a receptacle, it is unlike a sack and cannot become richly impure. The explanation again is there was a small cavity at the end of the reed near the knot. He looks there to ascertain whether it has filled with oil, which would indicate the olives are ready to be placed in the olive press. The cavity is a type of small receptacle which renders the reed fit to become ritually impure.
Rabbi.
I'm sorry. Just to explain, I initially thought incorrectly, at least inconsistent with Rashi, that we're talking about as a reed which has some kind of extra attachment at the end. That's what I thought. I was clearly incorrect. Certainly Rashi does not agree with me, and I'm going to defer to Rashi. So Rashi seems to now explain is that you have a hollow reed, but that's just a reed. How do they make it? For whatever reason, they would put in a knot of sorts, some kind of material, which is cork-like. It would plug it up so that the whole hollow does not become full of oil or contaminated or whatever. And now, ironically, by limiting the amount of the reed that could potentially bring in oil, it has now become a keli in that it could hold oil. I imagine this is something like, those, the how do you call it? The things you stick in to check the oil levels in your car?
The dipstick.
Yeah, so there's something kind of like that with this stick where you can, it's a gauge, but the way the gauge works is it actually contains a little bit of the oil. Right, Beryl?
Rabbi, I'm curious. Yesterday we had the opinion that these are two categories. Tuma is one thing, Mook says something else. So that was just an opinion because we're going right back into that.
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time.
We had the opinion that we
Yes.
shouldn't compare the two things because there's different criteria for
Nachon.
Tuma and different criteria for what we can do on Shabbos.
Nachon.
So why are we back into Tuma and that? It was just an opinion. I thought we
No, no,
were.
so let me clarify. Our Gemara yesterday was probing if one can or cannot compare the laws of Tuma and the laws of Shabbos. That was in the Gemara. So, but here the Mishnah itself, in a different context, does make that comparison, which I think what your question is, and I actually have this question too, is how does the Gemara yesterday have a whole question about comparing Shabbos to Tuma or not, if our Mishnah itself indicates that you cannot compare Shabbos and Tuma because they are two different worlds. So now we need to look back and consider the intricacies of the laws of the needle.
I'm just curious, Rabbi. In the laws of Tuma, does somebody go and compare things to what we can and can't use on Shabbos? The other side of the coin.
It's a compare and contrast. So many times there is a difference. Many times there isn't. But you're asking, you're forcing me to consider that it's actually not a terrible question. Beryl, I'm sorry, that's already a big compliment. It's a good question, and I'm not sure how this would be. It would take some effort to explain why that Gemara would not be able to resolve that question from our Mishnah here, which says that we explicitly do not compare Shabbos to Tuma. Hey.
You know, I'm thinking of this like in cross-examination.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because
Rebero,
yeah.
you were mechaven to the holy Ran, who asks your question. I don't have the Ran attached over here, but I have it excerpt there. I have an excerpt over here. You know why? Because I'm looking in the wrong place. One second. Let's try something. Let's try something new.
Good company to be in.
Let's try something new. Join me here for a moment. Today we're going to do something we haven't done before in our Gemara share, but here's the story. The Gemara is a lengthy work. Long, intricate, with back and forth. What happens if you're a layperson living 1,500 years ago, 1,600 years ago, and you just want to know how to observe the laws of Shabbos? You're going to have a very hard time because you're going to have to search the entire Gemara, at the very least, the entire Masechah Shabbos. And so it made the Gemara a little inaccessible for the average layperson. So there were a series of initiatives to make the teachings of the Mishnah more accessible. I'm intentionally going off on a tangent to expand and broaden our horizon of the different resources in the history of the Gemara. So I hope you'll indulge me. And so the first person that came along in a major way was someone called Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, the Rif, who took the Gemara, and all he did is cut out the Shakla V'Tarya and left basically the outline of the halacha l'maisa. Now, this is not an easy and simple work because many times it's not clear who the halacha follows, and so it's not simply an editing job where he could just cut out. This was a very deep, complex work that only came after years of scholarship and a brilliant grasp of the entire Gemara. So ultimately what he does, and it's in the back of every printed Gemara, or most printed Gemaras, the Rif, it has almost the same Surah Sadaf, it has almost the same appearance of the layout of our Gemara. And so here we have an excerpt of the Rif on our Gemara. He quotes the Mishnah. Here's the Mishnah. The way he quotes the Mishnah is actually a little bit longer, a longer Mishnah than the way it's printed in the Gemara. And then he quotes the Gemara. I just want to make sure I'm actually in the right place. I don't think I am. Hold on. Okay, so he quotes the Mishnah. On the Rif, whose work we're looking at, there are several commentaries. One of them is the Ran. And the Ran asks, I think a question. I need to find the question. You see, now I'm striking out over here. You know, I was on the previous Gemara. Give me another second. Bear with me a moment. Also, we're gonna get there. You know what? I'm striking out. I'm gonna have to just give it to you, Balpeh. I'm sorry. But anyways, that's the Rif and that's the Ran. And on the Ran somewhere, there is the following. He asks, our Mishnah here distinguishes between Tumah and Tara, that they're very different. Previously in the Gemara, Rava attempted to bring halachic clarity about a machat, about a needle from the laws of impurity. Middling in Tumah lavmana, in Shabbos lavmana. He compares the two, and the Gemara says, you cannot compare the two. Surely, we could have just used our Mishnah to prove that you cannot compare the two. One of the explanations given by the Sfas Emes and others is, you can't compare the two. Our question about the reed has nothing to do with it being considered a kli. It has to do with a very specific discussion of receptacle or not. Whereas the discussion of Rava was about a needle. A needle is made out of metal. And it was a question of if a broken tool loses its status or not. So Rava is saying, for the purposes of a broken keli, is it still useful or not? Rava wants to compare the two. So it's an entirely different issue at hand. So let me just summarize what I just said in long, or in short rather. The Gemara, Rava tries to compare Shabbos and Tumah, and that's rejected. It should have been rejected out hand from our Mishnah, which clearly differentiates between Tumah and Shabbos. And I think this is really what Reb Beryl's question was. The Sfas Emes and others answer, it's not really comparable. Because there is a question, a sub issue, which is Kli Kibul, which that clearly is not comparable between Shabbos and Tumah and Tahara. But as far as the general notion of a tool being useful or not, Rava thinks you can compare Shabbos and Tumah, and the Gemara Abaya disagrees. So you cannot necessarily, you would not be able to use our Gemara as proof, support, or disproof to the discussion of Rava. Take it or leave it. Now I need to get back to our Gemara. New Mishnah. I'm sorry, any questions, comments, clarifications? It was a little bit of an abrupt landing. All right. So we'll see the new Mishnah. New Mishnah, or the second, Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi teaches, and in case you're feeling lost, I want to bring you back to the center, because in today's reading now, we're going to start a general overview of the history of Muktzah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Kol hakelim nitolim. All kelim can be wielded, can be moved, can be transported with certain criteria. All kelim are not considered a muktzah if they have a permissible use. Chutz min hamasar agadol, with the exception of a massive saw, the yasin shel macharesha, and the peg of a plow or the blade of a plow. Rashi, Meser Gadol, Megera Gedola, Shasuya Liktsot Korot, a large saw that's used for cutting wood, that would be Muksa. V'yasa Shal Machareshu, Kli Gadol, Asuk Sakin, it's a kind of knife, Shaboy Oisan Choritz shall tell him, and it's used to cut up, to break up the earth, to make a row for planting. What is unique about a saw and a blade for a plow? Dehanach kaped alayu. A person is extremely concerned about their sharpness. A large saw that's used for what do you call a large saw that's used in the lumber industry, says Rashi, has no other use.
Some of them require two people.
Yeah. I'm thinking of those massive saws. So one of those massive saws have one distinct use. It needs to be in good condition. And so you're not going to want or let anybody take it and do some other kind of lesser function or different function. And similarly, the blade of the plow, is that we call a plowshare? But the blade of the plow needs to be very sharp, very strong, and very precise to break open the earth. I have a feeling that after every use, there's probably a maintenance process to keep it sharp, to keep it functional. And so, Yossi says, aside for those two kalim, which we are super makpid, we're super concerned about their quality and their well-being, and therefore we are given a specific place. We don't anticipate it being moved around. Short of that, every keli can be used on Shabbos, assuming you have a permissible function.
Rabbi, do we really have to be told? I mean, these massive, a needle, I understand. These massive things, would you think that you're going to use a part of a plow? You have to worry about halacha. You can't figure that out.
Well, being that you're not going to use it for anything else, it becomes muksa. Now, Beryl, I have a question. You know a little Yiddish, right? How do you say knife in Yiddish?
A messer.
A messer. So I'm wondering if the word messer in Yiddish is related to the word masar that we're using here as a saw.
Now, the word messer in Yiddish is related to the German word messer.
So is the German word messer related to the Mishnaic word masar?
I think it's right.
The Germans stole it from the Yiddish.
Yeah, the Germans, they were listening in, they were eavesdropping. No. All right. You never know. You got to ask the question.
My messer was on Hitler's neck.
All righty. Let us see. I want to show you really fast, even though it's going to give away a little bit of the secret of the Gemara. Shana, yes. All tools may be used on Shabbos. I'm sorry, carried on Shabbos for permissible uses. Which is the terminology that our Mishnah is, which is what our Mishnah is referring to. With the exception of something that's muksa because of damage, concern about damage. What are instances of something that you're concerned about damage? Kigoin. And again, some of this we'll see in the Gemara. I'm just showing this to you now so we can walk away with something, a bite-sized idea. Sakin shel shchita, a ritual chalif, which needs to be in pristine, sharp condition. You don't want a person using a chalif to chop carrots, or it's going to be damaged. Oishal mila, nor a knife that a moil uses that needs to be very sterile. Alan, obviously following what was considered sterile back then. Today, we would hopefully have a higher standard of keeping something sterile.
I hope so.
The Ismail Shel Safarim, and a knife, which I think we're talking about bloodletting here. V'sakin Shel Sofrim, Shemisakin Bekumas, and a knife used by a scribe that he shaves his quills. All of these, Kivan Shemakpidin, Shaloi Lasos Behem Tashmash Acher, being that we're always very meticulous, that it should be only used for their specific use. Also, l'taltalei b'Shabbos. You may therefore not carry it on Shabbos. Afilu l'tzarech mekom l'tzarech, you can't move it, you cannot use it, because it's muksa machmas chesron kiss. A person strongly does not want it to be touched or used in any other manner, and because that's the general sentiment, it becomes entirely muksa. Even if it's in a series of knives that are otherwise permissible. Anyways, long story short, this is a many. So the word, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't use over here the words of our Mishnah, but the idea here sounds like Muksa Machmas Chesron Kis. Let's see the Gemara and we'll learn a whole lot more. Amar Rav Nachman, hi, uchlo de katsari, let's get a better word for this. The launderer's riddle. What's a launderer's riddle or sprinkler? Anybody knows?
Probably the propeller of your washing machine.
Probably not. Klina chayshes, a copper tool, ha'asay kinafa, which is made like a sieve, the kavim, it has many holes. Ushal kaivsim, and it's used by launderers, and it's used to place on top of the clothing. And we use it to spritz water. V'yesh mefarshim shemegamrim mugmar mitachtav v'habegadim munachim alav miskarim derech. There are those that say that it is used to put incense. In the olden days, you couldn't remove a smell, but you could, what was the word? You could conceal it. You could put a more overpowering smell. And so part of the laundering process was you put a nice, pleasant smelling fragrance and incense on the clothing, and hopefully it covered up a lifetime worth of body odor, let's say. So this was the principle. So Nachman teaches, this tool used by launderers, it is identical to the plow of our Mishnah, that a person does not want it used for anything other than its specific use, and we're concerned about it getting damaged, and therefore it is off limits. Amar Abaye. And again, now we're going to see the ideas that we saw in the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see them in their source. Charba, and we're also going to find out that I may have translated incorrectly one or more than one item in the Shulchan Aruch. So let's see. Charba de ushkafe, the knife of an ush kafe. Rashi sachin shel ratzonim, the knife used by a person who makes leather. Steinsaltz says a shoemaker's knife. Not everybody agrees. Well, a tanner's knife. I like that better. Tanner. Person that works with leather. Visakina de ashkavta, and the knife of a butcher. Vichatzina de nagri, and a knife that a carpenter uses. It is also like a plow. These are highly specialized tools that a uman does not want to allow anyone else to use. Rashi sachino the shkafta sachin shel beis hamekubalim shakatzov mikapsim bevasar, a place where the meat is prepped and stored. Chatzina kolani kapti alam mishum de pagme umakzi luhu biyadayim. Any other use would damage them, and therefore a person sets it way aside in their special place, does not intend or allow them to be used for another purpose. Tosfos says that maybe it's not a butcher's knife, maybe it's a chalaf. And indeed, the Shulchan Aruch seems to take that halacha. And Tosfos underscores that indeed all these items should not be carried, even for a permissible use, because they are truly muktzah. So a shoichet should keep his tools stored and off limits. Well, that's actually what they do, and therefore you cannot use it on Shabbos. Now, let's take a look at the history of muktzah. This is an important text. Rishoina, initially, in the early stages of the development of the laws of muktzah, let's say, long ago, hayu aimrim shloisha kelim nitolim b'Shabbos. It was known, it was a thing that only 3 kelim were allowed to be used on Shabbos. All kelim were off limits, with the exception of 3 kinds of kelim, which are miksoya shel dvela, the kind of tool used for processing dried figs, Vizuama Listran Shal Kadeira. Read Rabbi Steinsaltz here for a moment. And the spoon and fork kind of tool. To clean a pot, whatever that means. The sack and katana shal gabi shulchan, and the knife on a table. Steinsaltz explains these are items that are used for eating. And if it would have been and all other kelim are muksa. Let's read Rashi, and then I want to tell you a little more. Oh no, Rashi tells us. Gimel kelim is suloi. 3 tools could be used, and all others were off limits. Well, the Kamon Amrin on later on, the Gemara is going to explain. In the days of Nehemiah, in the beginning of the Bayesheni, Gazru al tiltul kol hakelim. The Sanhedrin made a gzera to not be allowed to carry any kelim. Kidei ligdor gather. This was to put up a fence. Lehachmir b'isuri Shabbos mipnei shoyim hakelim. The Chazal, the Chachamim, the Sanhedrin noticed that Jews were being very lax in their Shabbos observance, and in order to bring the people back to a meticulous, high level of Shabbos observance, the Chachamim said all kelim are off limits with the exception of the 3 that are needed for eating, which are, and we already read Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation, but let's go again. Miksoya shel devela. Izmal shemechatchem boi devela. A type of knife that's used to cut the dried figs. And it brings proof that this language is actually consistent with that. Zuhama listron. Kaf kedoila shemesaltem by zuhama shel kedera. It was a big spoon that was used to clean off or scoop off something from the pot. The sakin katan shechoitchem by lechem ubasar, and a small knife. The oichlim dehani tadir mitashmish. Sorry, the oichlim dehani tadir mitashmish. These were frequently used, and therefore they were absolutely essential for Shabbos observance. Why wasn't the big pot considered boirer? So maybe it wasn't used to actually scoop out. It was just used to push aside to give access to the food. So originally, Shabbos, your hands were just about always empty. Hitiru, v'chazru, v'hitiru. There was then a process where the sages eased up the intensity of the Shabbos restrictions. Hitiru, v'chazru, v'hitiru, v'chazru, v'hitiru. They were slowly but surely bringing more and more items back into the realm of permissible handling. I think we might say this is akin to a diet, where in certain diets, initially there's almost nothing that's allowed to be eaten, is highly restrictive. And then with time, when the person gets their health or their weight under control, gradually they reintroduce certain items into their diet. So here the Jewish people were on a Shabbos observance diet. They were not allowed to handle any kelim except for the things that were absolutely necessary to subsist. And then the sages began a process of slowly letting things back on the table, until they came to the point that they said, Kol kelim. Nitolim Shabbos, all kelim are allowed to be handled on Shabbos. Chutz min masar gadol, v'yasach shel nacharesha, with the exception of these large, heavy, sharp, precision tools, the large saw and the plow. Let's read Rashi. Hitiru, oit. Kisharo shechazru lizar ksas b'isur Shabbos. When they saw that the people were getting better at Shabbos, they allowed some things. So the Mishnah or the Tosefta, without giving the details, indicates that there were 3 waves of easing, of causing or of creating more and more license to do certain things on Shabbos, and the Gemara is going to discuss what this is. Until the point where they were matter everything. Tosfos adds an important detail, which I don't know if everyone agrees. The tools that we're talking about here were non-receptacle tools. The pshita, the kaisa is carrots, the sloiches and metalpin. Obviously, you could use a cup to drink, and a plate to hold your food, and a bowl to hold your chicken soup. But what we're saying is other kalim, which were knives or forks, which did not have a receptacle in the conventional manner, so those we said were muksa, and then they became more permissible. Does everyone agree with Tosfos? Doubt.
Rabbi, I have a knife here that can cut off at the neck.
Oh, wow, that's scary. Okay. There's an interesting Chassam Sofer which says that certain, and it actually trickles into the Shulchan Aruch as well. Tosfos says that there essentially are three kinds of tools. There are vessels that are muktzah till this very day. Talk about a saw and a plow and other things that are related to that. There are things that were muktzah and then became permissible for a permissible use. And then there are some items that are so super not muktzah that maybe you could use it for anything at all. And that would be cups, plates. And if you remember, when we looked in the Shulchan Aruch at the beginning of this discussion, at the very beginning of the chapter, we noticed that there was a reference to, maybe it was in the earlier time, the permissibility of handling cups and bowls, etc. That's maybe a result of Tosfos and the way the Chassam Sofer others understand it. Let's take up, it's 11 o'clock. Tomorrow with Hashem's, let me just show you. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what does it mean, Yitiru, v'chazer v'yitiru, v'chazer v'yitiru. What were the three stages of readmitting tools to the Jewish toolbox, the Shabbos toolbox? That, my dear friends, concludes today's Gemara. Let's close as we opened with prayerful wishes for good news and health for everyone, and a special prayer for the healing of Reuven, Kalev, Paltiel, Ben, Sivya, Minsa, and his whole family and all his friends. They shall be safe and happy, and we should have good news for all of Klal Yisrael. Let's pray for peace, stability, Ava v'achva, shalom v'reyus across the globe, and certainly for Klal Yisrael. My dear friends, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining, and hope to see everybody tomorrow. Same time, same link. Where we'll continue this important historic discussion of the development of Muktzah. Thank you for being here.